I want to take you back to a moment that I think many people here have lived through. Picture this. It's late at night, you're sitting alone in your dorm room, there's a problem set open, and you have a notebook full of half-finished equations. You're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. That was me during my freshman year at the University of Florida, staring at a Calc 1 problem set. I remember sitting there, feeling completely drained. Not tired, but drained in a deeper way. Frustrated, disconnected, and unsure why. I wasn't struggling academically. I understood the material, but every problem I solved felt like I was checking a box instead of building towards something that mattered to me. I told myself that this was discipline, that this was growth, that this is just what progress felt like. But something didn't sit right with me. See, what I wanted to be doing wasn't homework. I wanted to be building something. I wanted to understand how things actually worked. But when you're on a path that's clearly laid out, you don't question it. You assume the discomfort is temporary. I didn't know it then, but that was the first time that I really began to notice how the structures around us shape the choices that we make. Years later, I would go on to realize that this quiet tension I was experiencing would actually become the starting point for what would later on become my company. What made this moment so confusing wasn't that I was unhappy. It was that nothing was obviously wrong. No one told me this is what success has to look like. It's much quieter than that. You watch the people around you and you begin to notice what gets praised. You begin to notice what feels safe to say out loud. We start to collectively understand the rules without anyone actually ever explaining them to us. There's a certain comfort in that, because when you're on a path that's clearly marked, you don't have to make as many decisions. You keep moving forward, assuming clarity will arrive eventually. And if there's enough people moving in the same direction as you, staying on that path feels responsible. Deviating from it feels reckless, even if you don't know why. Everyone around me was optimizing for similar outcomes. Internships, job offers, next steps. You could feel what mattered, even if no one explicitly said it. You could feel which choices came with approval and which choices came with raised eyebrows. I didn't feel pressured by any one person. I felt pressured by the absence of alternatives. So I stayed. I assumed the discomfort was part of the growth. And to be fair, sometimes it is. Sitting alone in that dorm room night after night, I realized that it wasn't the work itself that was difficult. It was the fact that I was moving forward on a path that I hadn't consciously chosen. I didn't have the language for it at the time. I just knew that something felt off. I didn't doubt the value of education. I still don't. College gave me structure, exposure, and a place to grow into adulthood. What I was questioning was something much more subtle. I was questioning whether the default version of success I was surrounded by actually fit me. That tension stayed with me, especially because I had a scholarship. Moving away from the conventional path didn't just feel risky, it felt irresponsible. I didn't just fear failure, I feared wasted potential. I didn't want to make a decision that would disappoint the people around me and ultimately disappoint myself. So instead of making a dramatic exit, I made a quieter adjustment. I switched my degree from computer science to marketing, which gave me more flexibility with my time. With that flexibility, I was able to focus on an idea that I couldn't stop coming back to. That idea eventually became my company, Quant Data. I had been trading since middle school, and in high school I started an online community with thousands of traders trying to understand the financial markets together. We were all asking similar questions. Why were the prices of certain assets moving? What was causing those prices to move? And why did it always feel like some people knew more than the rest of us? As I continued to lead my online community, I realized something unsettling. The data that provided context around why certain prices were moving existed. It was just mostly inaccessible. Institutional firms had access to expensive and complex financial data feeds that the average person didn't have access to. When I first learned of that, my initial emotion wasn't anger. It was clarity. I thought, oh, this is rigged. Not maliciously, but structurally. That realization stuck with me, not because I wanted an advantage, but because most people didn't even realize what they were missing. They were blaming themselves for pure outcomes shaped by information that they never even had access to. That made me curious. I started reading through filings, research papers about market mechanics, anything I could get my hands on. Not because I had to, but because I was genuinely interested in how this complex system actually functioned. Every day, I would finish my schoolwork as quickly as possible so I could spend more time polling on that thread. Quant Data wasn't a company at first. It was a tool that I wanted to exist because I needed it. Quant Data took these expensive and complex financial data sets and made them more accessible to the average person. And when people in my community started relying on what we had built, it became more than an experiment. It became something that people actually depended on. When COVID hit and campus shut down, the usual structures of college life disappeared. Schedules faded, social comparison faded, and in that vacuum, building my business gave my days a sense of direction. We had about $4,000, an unfinished product, and we had just signed a $50,000 data contract with a 90-day development window. Looking back on it, it sounds bold, but at the time, it didn't feel bold. It just felt necessary. What surprised me wasn't how difficult it was. It was how focused I had felt. In 2022, I moved to New York City for a summer internship on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. Working from Wall Street, I observed how small rule changes resulted in significant behavioral changes. A small requirement would shift, a small incentive would move, and almost immediately, thousands of market participants would adjust their positions. When the structure changed, the behavior followed. After graduating, I joined Nasdaq full-time in 2023. Nasdaq is the company behind the systems that allow individuals to buy and sell stocks every day. During my time there, I worked on a set of programs designed to influence market behavior, not by telling people what to do, but by adjusting what the system actually rewarded. The program I was working on focused on a subset of market participants that supply prices to the market to allow the markets to operate more efficiently. We tied real rewards to the quality and consistency of the prices that these participants were supplying. And in doing so, behavior across the market shifted almost immediately. Once again, I saw a similar pattern emerge. When the structure changes, the behavior follows. At the same time, I was still building my business, Quant Data. But to be honest, my business was stagnant. I was advancing my career professionally and learning a ton. But the thing that I cared about most was not getting enough of my attention. External signals started to show up. I was listed on a Forbes under 30 list. Media interest soon followed. From the outside, it looked like momentum, like confirmation that I was doing things correctly. But then something unexpected happened. I received a multi-million-dollar acquisition offer for my company, Quant Data. On paper, it was everything you're supposed to want. Financial security, validation, a clean exit. The kinds of things that people work their entire careers towards. I thought about what it meant for my future, and I strongly considered the offer, but something didn't sit right with me. Accepting that offer would have been a conclusion without answering a question that I truly cared about. What would happen if I actually gave quant data my full attention? At this point, I was still at Nasdaq. I was still learning a ton, and I was surrounded by extremely intelligent people. I could see a clear path forward: promotions, stability, credibility, the kind of path that's really difficult to walk away from. Nothing was broken, no doors were closing, no one was pushing me out. If anything, the system was doing exactly what it was designed to do. It was rewarding me. And walking away from that didn't feel bold. It felt irresponsible. I kept thinking about how difficult it was to get into a position like mine. How many people would give up anything to be in my seat? And I told myself that walking away would have meant throwing away years of progress that I had worked towards. For a while, that logic worked. It kept me there longer than I probably would have stayed otherwise. Not because I didn't know what I want, but because the cost of being wrong felt so high. I didn't want to make a decision and fail, as there would be no one else to blame. That's the quiet power of structure. It doesn't trap you when things are bad. It holds you in place when things are good. Eventually, the question stopped being, is it logical to stay? And it became, could I live with never finding out what would happen if I left? And that's when I did it. I left my position at Nasdaq, not because I didn't know what I want, not because I was unhappy, but because staying had simply become the safer default and not the better choice. In 2025, I walked away from a position that on paper looked like everything I was supposed to want. After leaving and committing fully to my company, Quant Data, something important shifted. For the first time, I was no longer splitting my time and energy between two identities. I was no longer building on the margins of my day anymore. The responsibility that I felt was no longer pressure. It was clarity. Quant Data was no longer a side project. It was the work. And committing fully didn't feel reckless. It felt honest. Not long after, the results reflected that focus. Within just a few months, our revenues more than quadrupled. Our social media reach expanded dramatically, reaching millions of people every month. I didn't change our strategies or our ideas. I simply committed fully. It wasn't luck. It was alignment. When I removed the constraints that were fragmenting my time and energy, the same amount of effort produced very different outcomes. I wasn't working harder. I was working in an environment that fit how I think and build. And after committing, it changed how I viewed things that came after. With no rigid schedule telling me where to be or what to do, I was able to actually focus in on how I function best. When I was the most focused, when I was the most calm, and when I could think the most clearly. A few weeks later, I found myself working from Southern Europe. I remember sitting on a balcony in Greece. There was a restaurant below me, families eating late into the night, kids running around in the streets. No urgency, no optimization, no sense that life had to fit into this narrowly defined schedule to be meaningful. It wasn't the freedom that struck me, it was perspective. Many of the decisions that I thought I had made were heavily influenced by the environments I was in. Not forced, just nudged. The paths that were the most obvious were the ones made easiest to follow. I don't spend all day thinking about systems. Most of the time, I'm just living and working like everyone else. But when something feels persistently wrong, I stop and ask myself a question. Is it hard because it's challenging, or is it hard because it no longer fits? There's a difference. Growth is uncomfortable, learning is uncomfortable, and discomfort is part of becoming better. But when the very thing you're working on makes you consistently unhappy for an extended period of time, that's no longer growth. That's misalignment. And it's worth paying attention to. I don't want you to take from my story that college is bad or that structure is bad. It's the opposite. Structure is extremely valuable, and it gives you a place to start. What I do want you to take away is that there's never only one acceptable path forward. That's the architecture of choice. Once we understand that, we get better at noticing when we're growing and when it might be time to pivot. That's what being avant-garde really is. It's not about rejecting structure. It's about noticing when it no longer fits and designing something better for yourself. Thank you.